Blessings everyone. Welcome back to the channel. So I do apologize for the lateness of this video. Unfortunately I had to do some traveling rather quick, and then while I was traveling I realized I really need a break. So I actually took some time to take a little bit of a vacation as well. It was very soothing, and I'll probably end up making a video talking about that as well, because this past vacation was very eye-opening for me in many ways. And with that cryptic message, welcome to the third episode of Vesta Vox. And today we are going to be discussing the book The Blessing Way by Tony Hillerman. This book is very interesting. It is a work of fiction, but something about the writing style that Tony Hillerman uses I've noticed has made its way into my own writing. So we will discuss that further, and I look forward to talking about the book in full in the episode. So, without further ado, let's begin. And so we shall begin with the story time of the book, detailing why I decided to choose this book as a point of discussion and reading, and how it came to be in my possession, I guess you could say. So it is another victim of my browsing, I guess you could say. I go to my local bookstore, and whenever I can, I try to make it a sort of weekend ritual, if you will, where I will go to my favorite local coffee shop, or maybe try a new one. I'll sit there for a bit, typically early in the morning, working on some things I need to finish up for the week. Maybe doing a little writing, a little drawing. And then typically afterwards, I will treat myself to a lunch, but before I go to that lunch, I go to my local bookstore to select some books to read while I eat. And so, as it happens, I was at the bookstore again after such a day, and I tend to browse a bit, so I was just sort of going through the different sections of the bookstore, looking at what was available, seeing if anything caught my eye. And as I was browsing, there was this, it's a sort of smaller paperback book. I will put an image on the screen for you so you can see which version of the book I'm referring to. A sort of smaller paperback book of stunning black, white, and red designs. And I thought, oh, interesting. I'd never heard of the author before, so I can't speak. I picked up the book, and turning it over, looking at the cover, I was struck by the design on the cover, really. And I know they say don't judge a book by its cover. I personally definitely hold to that. But in this case, it was this cover, because it was so simple, but so sort of, the wolf is staring into your soul of sorts. I decided, oh, well, I think I have found my book for today. And so I picked it up, and as I started reading it, I found myself getting very much drawn into the story, and curious, too, about the author, the story itself, and the apparent subsequent series that comes after it. But that is how I came to get the book and why I decided to discuss it. So now we will move on into more of the, I guess you could say, discussion of the book. And so to begin this discussion, I would like to clarify that in this book it talks a lot about a different sort of, it mentions the word Indians, Native Americans, different terms. So because of that, since I just read it, you will probably hear me refer to the Navajo, Hopi, Anasazi people as either Indian, Native American Indian, or Native Americans. And this book was written around the 70s to 80s time period. And what's very interesting is just how much research the author did into Native American, I guess, culture. And when you read it, and I looked up a little bit about the author too, he was very much, he wanted to be as accurate as possible with his information, and he has several accolades from, the Navajo Storytelling Society, I believe was one of them, for just the level of his research and how true to form he wanted to make his characters. So I just thought that was very interesting. Another quick disclosure, please excuse my pronunciation of several of these terms. I may not have them quite right. When I was reading the book, I realized that I do not have a sense of the tongue, I guess you could say, for the language and such. I tried to do the research that I could in looking up how to say certain things, but if I mispronounce them, please do not hold that against me. I'm still actually researching a little bit more to gain some knowledge on these topics, but I just figured I would throw that out there to give you some context. So overall, I would say the book is very interesting, and one interesting aspect of it, at least for me reading this book, was it seemed to the main character of, or one of the main characters, I guess you could say, sort of the linchpin character, Joe Leaphorn, is the tribal police officer involved in this, and consequently the series of books after this feature Joe Leaphorn as the main protagonist. However, for this book, what was interesting to me is that when you're reading it particularly, it feels like you don't spend a lot of time with Leaphorn. In fact, you spend much more time with Miss Ellen Leon and Bergen McKee. Now, there is one whole chapter devoted to Joe Leaphorn, talking to people and such, but it feels like we spend much more time with Bergen McKee and Miss Ellen Leon. And to kind of go along with that, I did find myself becoming rather invested in their story, and not necessarily in the way that one would be interested in sort of a slow burn budding romance. It's just that the two characters felt very real, and even though there wasn't a lot of background on either of them, and certainly not Miss Ellen Leon, there was this sense of knowing them and understanding their plight. So for Miss Ellen Leon, she had fallen in love with this blonde engineer that she met in college, and she was out looking for him. But one of the things that we finally find out as she's talking to Bergen McKee about it, was that she loved him and he seemed to love her, but he seemed to have a chip on his shoulder. Almost, at least for me, it seemed like he had some sort of victim mentality, and the feeling that in order to get ahead in the world, he needed money. He had to have lots of money and do grand things in order to set himself up to be a success in his eyes. And from what Miss Ellen Leon was saying, that did not quite fall in line with what she perceived as being successful necessarily. She seemed to be more of the type of, she just wanted to be with him, to be, live comfortably, but ultimately it was their relationship together that would be, enough, I think, for her, just based off of what I've sort of read. And so she was out there to, it sounds like, give her blonde engineer an ultimatum to tell him, look, I'm unhappy and I don't like where this is going, basically, and you're going to have to choose between this big money dream of yours or me. And that sort of hit home with me a little bit, so I could definitely relate with Miss Ellen Leon of wanting to have a clear answer for a future of a relationship. And then on Bergen McKee's side, he was divorced. He wasn't, he is an anthropologist, but apparently a very successful one, and through little bits and pieces here, we can see just how intelligent he is incredibly intelligent. And he is well liked by student and faculty alike. He's also a war veteran. He served in the Korean War, so he's definitely this multifaceted character. And to kind of boil down what I'm trying to get at, I guess you could say, and I need to stop saying the phrase, I guess you could say, I don't know why I picked that up. I apologize if you hear that over and over in the video. I don't know where that quite came from. But anyway... So the interesting dichotomy between the two that I sort of noticed is the power of men and women, and the power of men and women working together. Now, what I mean by that, now let's look at Bergen McKee, and sort of, at least in my interpretation of the word manly or man, I guess you could say, without looking at the biological aspects of it, is Bergen McKee is very much a man. He is very intelligent. He has a subject that he has devoted a lot of time and energy to. And it sounds like in the marriage, it wasn't necessarily, that he and his wife, had arguments or were beating each other, or he was dismissive towards her and wasn't necessarily readily available. It sounds like his wife simply got bored and decided that they weren't a good match anymore. She just didn't seem to have the same level of interest or comfort that he did. And he obviously was upset about it. He, wished that he could be, as he said many times, a better man or someone more exciting that his wife maybe would have liked. But yet he is very comfortable with who he is. And he is not what many would consider to be manly, which is overtly assertive and loud and throwing his weight around. He is quite humble. In fact, he is embarrassed when he feels like he is talking too much or is excited about something, which personally to me is actually quite attractive, to have someone who is a little more retrospective, and if they are talking about something they are very excited for, they aren't saying it in an arrogant way or trying to school you. It is simply that they are very knowledgeable, and so they are speaking on the subject. That is quite interesting. And then, of course, with the training that he had during the Korean War and the things that he had to face there, that also gives him this element of understanding a sense of urgency, of needing to take care of a situation, of self-discipline and not giving up. He could have just laid down and let the big Navajo, as he called him, kill him, basically. But he fought for his survival. And he had the potential to hurt or harm or protect. But even when he was yelling at Miss Ellen Leon, and though she had in her mind, he hit his head, he must be crazy. When he did yell at her or do anything, he was not overtly mean. He was simply trying to convey to her that this is a serious situation. And unfortunately, Miss Ellen Leon did not quite pick up on that until the big Navajo had the gun pointing at their face. With that, I almost said it, with that being said. But looking at that, Bergen McKee is very much a man. And then we look at Miss Ellen Leon, and Bergen McKee, obviously, is quite attracted to her, but not in a sort of lewd way. It's little things about her eyes, the softness of her skin, just looking at her, he seems to sort of have this feeling of, this is a woman. But even though he finds himself thinking of her, it's very much, there's nothing untoward there, which is very refreshing to read in a time when many of the books I pick up in stores, if you'll pardon the expression, are essentially glorified porn, and I don't enjoy that personally. But with this book, it was very, very subtle, and Miss Ellen Leon uses her own tactics, I guess you could say. She doesn't have the brawn or the baseline knowledge of Indian culture, I guess you could say, but she does have other tricks up her sleeve, if you will. She is observant. She is a good driver, as we found. She took a little Volkswagen sedan down to the Four Corners and managed to maneuver it quite well with very little or no direction from Bergen McKee. She is able to listen and understand, and with part of that of being observant, McKee worried many times that, she would be upset with him, angry, would turn away from him when he did yell at her about certain things, or when they had to put on a show when he was trying to not write the letter. She looked hurt, and anyone would look hurt if you yell something hurtful at them, but she didn't hold it against him. In fact, she simply told him, "I know you're trying to protect me." And so she didn't freak out. She was cool in her own way. Being thrust into a situation like that would be frightening. But I think there was this underlying knowledge and strength to Miss Ellen Leon of, I am in a situation, I will simply adjust to it as needed. And again, it is not said in so many words in the book, but that is at least, I guess, for lack of a better term, the vibe that I got from Miss Ellen Leon. So she had her own power there. And with that being said, her sort of deep in her feminine energy, as McKee picked up on, he was able to help her And when she was injured or sad, or even just her being there, it made him perform at a higher level than perhaps maybe he would if he were just by himself. He had someone else to worry about, this woman who he was attracted to, and was a partner in some sort of ways in working with him to make their escape. But her mere presence allowed, I'm going to go out on a limb here and say, allowed the mystery to be solved. Because through her sort of guiding hand, her observance, and her support of Bergen McKee, and that is a big thing, she supported him not necessarily towards the beginning, but she very quickly understood that this is someone who is very smart, is very intelligent, and is very capable. And so little things like telling the big Navajo, well, you almost didn't catch him, that definitely put a feather in McKee's cap and helped him to keep performing. Because there would be a couple of times he would think back to the things that Miss Ellen Leon said, and it would bolster his strength. And so, saying all of that comes down to sort of this theme of the power of men and women working together. And certainly I have faced this in my relationship and other relationships before, and some of my girlfriends have also talked to me about the issues that they face in their relationships of men and women trying to communicate with one another. Men and women think very differently. We look at the world very differently, believe it or not. It's actually rather interesting discussing it. But because we have sort of two different ways of looking at the world, it does allow us, when we are working together and in tune and communicating, to be an almost unstoppable force and to overcome great risk to life, limb, pursuit of happiness, or property. And I think that the relationship between Bergen McKee and Miss Ellen Leon sort of highlights that. They heard each other, sure, they didn't trust each other, at least initially, but once they started working together, how subtle and minute, it gave both of them the strength that they needed. And I will say I am a sucker for any sort of unlikely romance in books, and so I was invested in this when I started noticing that, could there potentially be something there? And I was disappointed when Miss Ellen Leon mentioned a fiancé, and elated again when she mentioned that, actually, I might split with him. And I was thinking, well, for Bergen McKee, I hope for your happy chances. And at the end of the book, when she sends him that letter, and he makes the note of his wife Sarah left a very short letter, basically saying, I'm leaving with my lover to Las Vegas, I won't contest the divorce, versus Miss Ellen Leon, who left him a very long letter, and that's how the book ends. Basically, it's just saying it was a long letter. I think we can infer that they ended up becoming an item, if you will, which makes me happy. So one of the things in the book that I found very, very interesting, and again, like I said, I'm continuing some research into it, but this sort of dichotomy too of two different ways of thinking. And so the Navajo way, and this is just, I'm going to preface this is just what I got from this book. Again, like I said, I'm doing some more research, but the Navajo way, this idea of materialism and searching for money and having lots of money, that doesn't necessarily align with the Navajo values. Now versus the blonde engineer of Miss Ellen Leon and even the big Navajo, everything that they were doing was in the pursuit of large sums of money. And I think ultimately what this book goes to show is that I don't think there's necessarily anything inherently wrong with pursuing wealth or riches. I think it more depends on how you get to it. And as we can see here with the engineer, the big Navajo, and then the other gunman, I guess you could say, they were pursuing this money, but they were going about it in a less than moral way, stealing military secrets, maiming and killing animals, harassing those living on the reservation, killing those living on the reservation, That was not the way to pursue money for the things that they wanted, but that is how they chose to do it, and ultimately it ended in the death of all three men who were doing this. Highly unfortunate, but if you compare that to sort of the happiness and the acceptance of those who lived on the reservation, the Navajo there, who weren't, necessarily rich in terms of material wealth or financial wealth, but they had their practices, their families, extended families. They had a way of life that they were adhering to that brought them happiness in another way. So ultimately, to me, the theme of this story is that you do not need material wealth or large sums of money, and that the pursuit of this as a way of sort of saving yourself is not the answer here. The Navajo seem to have a grasp of that, but as those three men found, it was the pursuit of this money, and not just the pursuit of it, but getting it in any way they could, including the harming of others. You could say it was karma that came back to them and ultimately showed them that their way was not the correct way if they were leaning all of their hope into this money as their sole source of some sort of salvation. Another small discussion point. Towards the end of the book, while Bergen McKee is in the hospital recovering from a gunshot wound and dehydration and such, him and Jolie Porn end up talking. And they talk in the way that men tend to. They joke with each other, very colorful jokes, I guess you could say. But that is just highlighting part of their friendship. So one of the things Jolie Porn says is, you've got more Navajo in you than I do now. The doc says that you busted an oil pan, and then they put 10 gallons of blood in you. And then at one point, Bergen McKee comments, usually when you're in a situation like this, you expect the cavalry to arrive, and not the damn blanket-ass Indians. And Jolie Porn laughs. So, me discussing this is basically trying to talk about how, to each other, those words were not offensive. I think if some random person who did not have the innate knowledge and appreciation of the culture that Bergen McKee did, or the friendship with Jolie Porn, were to walk in and say that joke, both men would be very upset about that. But they have a repertoire. They're very, very good friends, and they're both able to sort of look at each other's cultures and stations in life and find humor in it. I have noticed this in many of the military friends that I have. Some of the jokes that you hear them say to each other, you look at them like, oh my goodness. But that is just that is part of the humor. That is honestly part of the acceptance of each other. And I notice that too sometimes just sitting in coffee shops or restaurants and listening in on the conversations around me, this concept of bringing humor as a part of understanding, and before you laugh at someone else, you first should be able to laugh at yourself. So humor as part of acceptance is a very, very small theme that I saw in here, but I felt that it was worth mentioning. And now just to finish up with an overall discussion of the book. A very interesting book. I'm looking forward to potentially, if I have time, in my grand amounts of time, reading other books of the series. But overall, the book was quite enjoyable. Jolie Porn seemed to be a very affable character. I did get quite invested in Bergen McKee and Ellen Leon. And the style of the book, I mentioned that in the introduction, it's very different from some of the other books that I read today. It's not stilted, I guess you could say, the language, but it doesn't have as much flowery language all the time. When Tony Hillerman is describing some of these landscapes, you can see the desert and the mountains and the sky. You can smell the sagebrush and the rain and the dust. And then it goes into the sorts of discussions. He is very good at building the scene around you without using very overtly flowery language or too many words. I guess is the best way that I could describe the writing style, but it resonated with me greatly to the point that this other story that I am working on myself, I've started to notice I have taken elements of Tony Hillerman's writing style, and that it fit the story that I was trying to write very well. Of, you can have this descriptive language when you need to, but other than that, there are other ways that you can sort of build the world without spending paragraph upon paragraph describing every little thing around you. I thought also very interesting in the book was how it was handled. And so initially in the beginning, it sort of hints at potentially it being a supernatural thriller in the sense that you had the Navajo wolf, or you could say a witch, essentially, someone who practices dark arts and, blows corpse powder on people, is able to change into multiple different forms, and is outside of the Navajo norm. And initially, hearing some of the things, you start to think, oh, maybe it is really a Navajo wolf? But then as you go through the story, elements come into play, especially when the wolf, the big Navajo and the Navajo wolf being the same person. You find that the Navajo wolf carries a gun, and then it starts to kind of unwrap the layers there of, okay, this is, not necessarily an actual witch, but what really is actually going on here? And I think Tony Hillerman does a great way of not completely dismissing the idea of the existence of the Navajo wolves, but coming into play of, okay, this is not a Navajo wolf in the sense of what it is supposed to be, but this guy still is very much a threat. One of the things I hate in many books, including books that are in line with my faith, is when someone completely dismisses another person's faith, essentially, and here, or belief system. And here in this book, that does not happen. At no point is anyone... In fact, the only person who really openly mocks the concept of the Navajo wolf is the big Navajo himself when they are all driving together in the Jeep. Miss Ellen, Leon, Bergen McKee, and the big Navajo. He has captured them and is taking them back to camp. And Bergen McKee realizes, oh, he's warning Miss Ellen Leon that he is a witch, a Navajo wolf, and that he is capable of turning into all these different animals and such. But what he's saying, he's essentially quoting the works of this other Native American researcher. And the way he is saying it is very dismissive and arrogant in the way of, you can tell he doesn't actually believe it himself. So while Bergen McKee doesn't come outright and say, oh, there are no Navajo wolves, in fact, that is his point of research, is trying to understand the concept of the Navajo wolf. And he never outwardly says that there is no such thing. He comments on that the evidence seems to suggest that in many cases where people bring up witching or Navajo wolves, there seems to actually be some subversive human evil at work underneath the accusations and such, versus, let's say, an actual Navajo wolf who's going around bewitching people and blowing corpse powder and causing bad dreams. But I think that is a very interesting point in the book for me personally, because that is something that I guess you could say turns me off when I'm reading other books and they'll say something very overtly like, there's no such thing and you're stupid. That grinds my gears a little bit. But overall, I highly recommend reading this book, actually, and some of other... I cannot talk suddenly. I recommend reading the book and reading some of Tony Hillerman's other works as well. The writing style is very clear, concise, descriptive, very enjoyable. The book is not too long. It is 18 chapters. Again, it feels like we tend to focus on Bergen McKee, but the other books follow Joe Leaphorn around as well. And really, it is just... It was a good read. I'm very glad I picked it up. And while it didn't necessarily open my eyes to huge concepts of such, it was a very good glimpse into Navajo and Native American culture and the Four Corners, and has interested me enough to where I'm actually researching a lot of the different words, the language, other such things, points of history, because I think it is important to sort of understand the background of the things that we read sometimes. Thank you for tuning in for the third episode of Vesta Vox. Especially for these earlier episodes, as I continue to work on my recording setup. I apologize if you hear background noise. I'm limited at this time, but I am saving up to get myself a very nice microphone and setting up a recording studio in my living space as well. But I do want to continue forging ahead. And so I've done that with this third episode. I might go back and re-record some of the other episodes as well, and certainly might return to this one. But in the future, I'm hoping to go a little more in depth with these episodes. Right now, they're mostly just featuring discussions of the books themselves, a sort of story time, if there are any quotes that really stand out to me. But one of the things I would like to do in the future is actually, if they are still living, have comments from the authors, interview people, have joint discussions with other content creators as well. And I have some things potentially in the works that I am continuing to pursue right now. And the instant that I have something to share with you all, I definitely will. I do have some exciting things that I'm trying to hold back on right now and not reveal them too soon, but I will let you know when these things do happen. And so very quickly to announce it here, the next book for the channel has been selected. I will be posting polls every once in a while on the community page of my YouTube channel here, asking what you would like to hear next. And so we had voting happening, and we will be reading a sort of young adult fiction, and I classify that as young adult reading style as well, not necessarily anything that's directed towards the young adult. And so, with that rambling aside, we will be reading Anna Sewell's Black Beauty. This is definitely one that had been in my list regardless. It is a beautiful book with a dark and yet light, melancholy story of triumph. It is a very real story, and that is something that I like in young adult fiction, are very real stories that start to show young adults being, upper teens up into the 20s for me, that what real life really looks like, and that despite a lot of challenges that you might have, you can move forward and things will get better. So that's sort of my philosophy looking into it. So you should start seeing videos of Black Beauty happening soon, and I look forward to reading it together. And so thank you so much for tuning in today. Big things on the horizon, a new book has been selected, and I am also going to be making a video soon talking about my Ko-Fi page in more detail. And with that being said, blessings everyone. I hope you have a wonderful day, and I cannot wait to see you in the next video. Goodbye.